like a nice background to start the video. Whew. These are really handy for a lot of things. Including a gear pad, I guess. All right. What's up, guys? Welcome to the first probably really cold morning episode I've had in a while. Although I left my house like at 6, a little before 6 this morning, before sunrise. It was like 40, and I get out here now and it's like 7:30, 7:45. It's like almost 70 already. So this just gotta go. Fall in New Mexico is every season. Okay. Tea. I know you probably thought it was water, didn't you? Morning tea. Holy cow, this is dusty. Definitely have to clean this off before I send it back. So, I have been researching the crap out of this lens. This is the Canon RF 800mm F11. And the reason why I've been researching it is, one, because it's brand new, and two, because I thought that I kind of wanted it. And there's just not much out there. I've watched all of the decent, credible YouTube videos. I've found as many articles as possible, which there aren't many. There's just not a lot of data and stuff on this new lens. So I've seen all the other YouTube videos, like I said. You know, Tony and Chelsea took it out. A couple other wildlife photographers have messed with it. And after watching all of those videos and after reading all of those comments on all of the videos, a couple things were made pretty clear to me. One is that people still didn't address some of the issues and questions that I had personally as a potential buyer. And two is they didn't answer y'all's questions either, because I saw so many of the same types of comments across so many different types of videos about the new RF F11 lenses. The biggest comment that I saw and the biggest question that I personally had is, how does it compare to something of a similar price range? So this thing is retailing for like $900 US. And, you know, like some of the videos I watch, you know, they were great and they did a good job and all that stuff. But comparing a $900 F11 Prime to a $13,000 600mm F4 super professional, amazing lens, I don't think that's really necessary, is it? And I think a lot of people are on the same page in terms of why. Like, we know what's going to be better. You know, we know what the obvious differences are. We know there's a weight difference. We know there's a price difference. We know there's an aperture difference. We know all that. That's common sense, right? But what we don't know is, how does it compare to something like this? So this is my favorite budget wildlife lens, and I've done a review on it. This is the Tamron 150-600 G2. So if you want to check out that review, which I did last year, and over the course of the year, I still stand by everything I said for that review, so you can check that out right up here. But it's a very similarly priced lens. It's a little bit more expensive on average. I think it's going for, you know, $1,200 to $1,400 new. On Amazon, on eBay, you can find it anywhere from $1,000 to $1,400. So it's a little bit more expensive, but still, you know, that's still the same ballpark as the $900 lens. So why does everybody want to see it compared to this thing? Well, there's a few reasons. One, the price. Two, the size. This is definitely heavier. But again, it's in the ballpark. It's not that much heavier. It's like a pound and some change heavier. Two, the focal lengths are really similar. 600 is pretty close to 800. You could throw a teleconverter on here and get to 840 f9, which I did and we will talk about. So the key reasons that I have questions about comparing these two for my own sake is that I like a lot of travel, and I like a lot of hiking, and I like a lot of wildlife that involves travel and hiking. I don't want to carry around big f4 lenses all the time. To me, when I use my f4 lenses, I'm sitting at the Bosque del Apache. I'm sitting in a blind somewhere. I'm at Yellowstone. I'm somewhere close to my car, somewhere close to the blind, whatever. I'm not hiking hardcore a lot. And the rest of the time, when I'm out with my family, or when I'm filming YouTube videos, or when I'm just doing my morning walks out here in my forest close to my house, I want something like this. I want something light. And I've been rolling with the 1-400, the Canon 1-400 Mark II, which is super sharp, super lightweight, comparatively speaking. And it's been my go-to lens for just about everything, definitely including wildlife. But I'm really starting to feel that lack of reach. You know, there's more that I want out of it. I've been shooting these elk out here with the 400mm, and I want more reach, you know, and I've been shooting. I don't always want to set up my blind for my birds and all that stuff. I don't always want to get full camoed out and go sit and wait for things. So that's the time when I want more reach. And the 600 has been absolutely amazing. I love it. Like I said, I'm not going to go into the full review of this because I've already done that. But let's jump into some of the differences that I will say that when I first grabbed this lens last week, I've had this for a little over a week now, I will say that I went into it having a lot of preconceived notions, or you know, a lot of thoughts that based on other people's videos and based on what I thought, never having used it, and all of that kind of went out the window for sure. So let's go over some positives real quick. I hear a phainopepla over there. If you hear a, that's a phainopepla. Very awesome little bird. If I see one while I'm talking to y'all, I will distract myself with it. So let's talk about some of the obvious benefits. The first thing is, I know everyone says this, but I cannot stress enough how incredibly stupidly light this lens is. It is an absolute dream to be able to handhold this thing and sling it over my shoulder and not have to worry about breaking my back over miles of hiking, and not have to worry about my wrist and my broken left arm that I snapped in half in the Navy, and you know, all of this stuff. I'm not the most physically fit person anymore, that's for sure. So the 800 being as light as it is, it's under 3 pounds, that's just stupid. I thought going into it, yeah, it'll make a little bit of a deal, you know, and it'll be a little bit beneficial. But I cannot tell you, after having it for this whole week, how important the actual weight factor has become in my priority list, even when compared to this guy, and even when compared to my 400. The weight priority has changed for me, for sure. So let's talk about sharpness. This lens is a fairly large diameter, 95mm for the front end, and it does really well. I've had no issues with sharpness whatsoever. I've found that, and I haven't done anything empirical. I haven't set up tests to compare it to this exactly. So if you're looking for an empirical, super scientific video, this isn't going to be it. This is just going to be my real world experiences. And in my real world experiences, I'm a professional photographer, professional wildlife and nature and landscape and sports and all that photographer. I have had zero issues with the images that I've gotten out of this lens for professional use. And I would feel very comfortable, having gotten the right images, turning these into any client or any magazine or whomever, whatever publication I'm selling to, anything like that. It is sharp. So I have no issues with sharpness. All right, so let's get to probably some of the things that everybody is most concerned about and that I was definitely curious about. Let's talk about that aperture. So f11 fixed aperture. I think a lot of people also didn't realize that f11 is the only aperture. When they say fixed, they mean it's f11 or nothing. There's no f13, there's no f16, there's no f22, not unless you put on a teleconverter. So f11 or nothing. I think everyone's biggest concern, biggest question, biggest gripe is that it's gonna be too slow for conditions that don't look like this, right? And I would say for the most part, you're probably right. That's true. So, you know, the biggest thing with this lens that I'm discovering is that it's not, obviously it's not a perfect lens. It is not the one go-to lens for all wildlife. It can't be, you know, and it's not for me, and it probably won't be for you. And I'm gonna go on a tangent real quick here, and I wanna talk about something that I've mentioned before, but I think it's super important when you're understanding, especially wildlife photography, but any type of photography. I think people are really quick, they're too quick to bash a piece of gear or a gear combo or whatever by saying, oh, well, that lens isn't good for this situation, or that camera body isn't good for this type of photography. And the problem is, like, that may be true. There may be some truth to that. However, I think most people, especially with wildlife photography, tend to put themselves in unrealistic situation. Yes, 800 sounds like a lot, right? It sounds, 800 millimeters just sounds like a lot, and it sounds like it should reach, you know, forever or whatever. But realistically, if you're shooting a flappy bird that, you know, a warbler, a finch, or even something robin size, or hell, even an eagle, and if you're shooting that more than 50 feet away, even with an 800, you're not going to be happy with the results. You're going to want to get closer. And it doesn't matter if you have the $13,000 800mm f5.6, and it doesn't matter if you have the $900 800mm f11. You're going to be unhappy. It's physics, you know, you're too far away. So I just wanted to mention that realistically, you know, when you're out there doing your wildlife with whatever setup you have, don't be so quick to dismiss the quality or capability of your gear, and really just take some time to judge your situation. You know, can you get closer? Are you close enough? Is there good enough light? Is anything possible that could help your gear more, you know, to get the most out of it? All right, so that was my tangent. Going along with that, finishing up the f11. It's f11. If you're here, if you're watching this, you're concerned about that, you understand what f11 is. If you don't understand what f11 is, aperture, you can check out my video about aperture right here. But basically, the smaller the aperture, the smaller the light hole. The larger the number of aperture, the smaller the light hole. That means you're letting in less light. So this lens is what we call a very slow lens. However, I have been pairing it with both the R5 and the R6. So I have it on the R5 right now, and I have the R6 right here. And that being said, both of these cameras are extremely good with high ISO capabilities. I will say they are probably, in fact, I could probably take out the probably in that statement, and I will say they are the best high ISO cameras I have ever used. And this is coming from my Canon 1DX Mark II and my Canon 5D Mark IV. So both of these cameras, the R5 and the R6, outperform those cameras in every way, shape, and form, especially with high ISO. So, like, let's give a real world example here. So it's early morning. I'm in the shade. I'm just going to be pointing to something right over here, and I'm going to meter. All right, so if there were a bird sitting at the end of this shade right here in this juniper that you can't see, well, you can see it a little bit. In this juniper here, if there were a bird right there, I'm at 250th of a second, which is plausibly enough if he's not flapping around like crazy. I'm jumping between 2500 and 4000 ISO. F11, 250th of a second. So I've got some similar shots here that were similar time of day this last week. And that being said, in those ranges, I have had, again, zero quality issues, image quality issues with this lens and these camera body combos. And I think these images look as good as they can, for sure. So let's talk about the other F11 issue that people keep bringing up, bokeh, background blur. It can't blur the background. F11's too fast. That's the most common comment that I'm seeing. And I think people are forgetting one important aspect of photography and principles of optical physics, and that is compression. So yes, F11 on a normal lens, a 200mm, a 70mm, you know, the wider you go, the less compression you're getting. So the wider you go on normal lenses, F11, there's gonna be less compression, which means less background blur. If you don't know what compression is and how that works, I have another video all about that you can check out right here. But suffice it to say that F11 with 800mm at the minimum focusing distance of this lens, which is like 19.6 feet, you're gonna get you some background blur. Don't worry about that. Is it gonna look like a 600 f4? No, but again, it doesn't cost $13,000. 5 figures at least, you know. But yes, all of these images that I have here have display some decent background blur to some extent, including this portrait that I took of Brittany when we were at White Sands, and she was standing probably 30 to 45 feet away, so not even the minimum focus distance, and there's just nothing. Granted, that was a white dune behind her, so you wouldn't have seen much of that anyways. However, the background separation for me is sufficient. It is there, and it is possible to achieve some sort of background blurring with F11. But again, when you're comparing it to this, you're going to have more background blur to an extent because of the faster aperture on here at f6.3, but then you're going to have less compression because it's a 600. But then the Tamron has a much closer minimum focus distance. So we'll get into that in just a minute, because I'm going to try to keep my mind going in the right direction before I forget what else I was going to say. All right, another pro for this lens is, and it should be obvious, I guess, is that it's only made for an RF, so it's only natural that a pro would be that you don't need an adapter. It's native, so not having an adapter is very nice. And not having an adapter, for me, I have found with all of my lenses that I've used, I have a lot of Tamrons, I have a lot of Canons. I have found that I have zero issues with focusing with the adapters and performance and stuff like that. It's basically every lens that I've put on my R5 and my R6 that requires the RF to EF adapter basically has performed flawlessly. I have not had any issues. So it's not that. It's just the size of the adapter and just having the extra element there between your lens, and that's just one more thing, you know. And so that's a small bonus for the 800, is that it's native, and I enjoy that. So let's talk about some cons and some things that I didn't really initially think of. First con, for me right off the bat, the worst thing about this lens is that it is not weather sealed. I understand that it is a budget intro lens, but I also understand that this lens basically has one primary function, and that's wildlife photography. I really wish that Canon would have at least put some sort of just minimal weather sealing on here, the O-ring in the back, you know, something on this lens, because you're doing it for wildlife. Like, you're not always going to be out there in the best conditions, and that really sucks, especially for me. I live out here in the desert where there's just stupid amounts of sand everywhere and dust, and I know that dust is going to get in here fast when I buy this lens. So that's the first biggest negative for me. So I'm not going to sit here and bash the Aperture and say that F11 is a negative for me, because I understand, I think, what Canon is trying to do. I understand. I just heard an elk bugling. Probably about 500 meters behind me. That's what I was out here for this morning. All right, sorry. See, I told you I get distracted. So I'm not going to sit here and bash the F11. I really feel like to get this lens at the price point and to get it at the weight that they wanted and all of that and the size, oh my God, that bugling is getting close. All right, I'll be right back. I'm sorry. I got to do this. Wow. I think I just ran like a quarter mile. The elk went down into a canyon. I can still hear him, but I couldn't follow him. Got too far away from my gear. And I was being entirely too loud. I did get some birds though. All right, so now that that's completely destroyed my train of thought, let's see if I can remember where I was going next. Future Brent here, real quick. Another thing that I wanted to mention is I'm on my phone right now and I'm shooting Phantopepilas with the 800, and the image stabilization is really great on this lens. I forgot to mention that. I just filmed all of this entire video and I forgot to mention that the image stabilization I've been very happy with. I've been consistently getting easily 3 to 4 stops with the image stabilization, maybe more. That's not scientific, maybe up to 5. I've been hand holding shots down to a couple of times even 1/125th of a second for like the deer and the elk and stuff, for the bigger things. And for these little birds sitting here on the perches and stuff out here, I've been easily able to drop it down to 400th of a second and get the ISO down to under 400 ISO. So the image stabilization on this thing is fantastic. And back to regular Brent for the rest of the video. All right, let's talk about a couple of other little negatives. First negative, this doesn't really matter for wildlife, but for astro, and it's a negative, but it gets canceled out by a positive, I guess. There's no focal length. There's no distance delineations on here. So like on this, you can see right there is the distance delineations where you can tell what you're focusing at. So you put it on infinity, you know, that kind of stuff. However, that is negated by the fact that on here, on the R5 and the R6, you can switch it. When you put it into manual, you then get that. And that's very handy. That's a little clip that I did from using this lens out at White Sands for landscape. So if you want to check that out, it's very interesting. 800mm for landscape. You can check that out right here. It's also been really great. The image stabilization on here has been really great for video. All of the video, I should mention, that I've put in this, all of the animal and bird clips that you've seen in this video have been handheld with this. So that in itself is very impressive. And being able to use 800 and handhold and get a clip, and then being able to film in the R5 in 8K and then put it on a 1080p timeline and do a 400 or 500% crop, it's just stupid fantastic. The fact that there goes, oh, here he comes, right there, nice and close. That is pushing the minimum focal distance though. Anyways, image stabilization for both stills and video on this thing is absolutely fantastic. So I haven't had much chance with birds in flight over this past week, but I have had some, and I will say that this combo is a game changer for the weight. Again, I cannot stress enough how easy it is to just hold this here and kind of wait, you know, and even with my broken left arm, I don't have a problem holding this for a few minutes straight and following a circling bird or whatever, like this osprey. I don't have a problem doing stuff like that. But on the negative side, the focal, the ability to focus, one of the things that I love about the R5 and the R6 are their autofocus capabilities, and along with that, not just the IAF, which is awesome sometimes, but the fact that you have almost 100% ability to focus in your screen. And that can be a huge advantage, like, because I can still have tracking a bird at 800 millimeters, especially like a raptor flying really fast or something. Like, it's not easy, and it's easy for the bird to get out of the center of the frame. And when it does that, like on this combo, you don't have a problem. Like, as long as the bird is in frame totally, even if the wings are close to the edge or whatever, it's not gonna lose focus. It's gonna nail it every time, and I love that. But on this lens and the 600 F11, which I don't have, but it's physically the same, on this you only get that center portion of the lens that can autofocus because of the F11. And even when I put the teleconverter on this and got to F9, I was not restricted in that way for focal range. I mean, for focusing. My God, I can't talk. I wasn't restricted for focusing to the center. I was able to focus all the way out to the edge. So like, I got these awesome shots of this osprey diving with the 600 and the teleconverter on there. And sharpness aside, which it's not as sharp as this, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Just, we're talking about the focus. Even when I couldn't keep up with the bird, or when I moved around because my hand was getting tired or shaking or whatever, even with all of that, we still have the ability to, I still had the ability to keep that bird in focus no matter what, even if it wasn't in the center of frame. So that made a shot like this a keeper, or potentially a keeper, when it wouldn't have been with this, because I would have lost focus with the bird going out of that center frame. All right, future Brent here again. So just finished talking about the 800. One of the negatives that I forgot to mention is that it does not have a lens hood. And I'm reminded of that because I'm using my 600 right now, and it does have a lens hood. And the sucky thing about not having a lens hood, well, you can buy one, it's separate, but the sucky thing about not having a lens hood for me has been when I'm hanging it off my shoulder, setting it down or whatever, I usually set the lens down like that. You know, so doing something like that, you can't do that with an 800. It's ill-advised. So if you want a lens hood, you're gonna have to pay for it. That's kind of a negative. All right, I'll let you get back to regular Brent and the rest of the review now. It's getting bright out here. That background is getting blown out, and I don't feel like sitting in the sun. So that's a definite negative with this guy, is the center focusing. I'm getting used to it, and with most things it's not a problem, but there are the occasions with my user error and my inability to keep the bird or the wildlife or whatever in the center of the frame. It's mostly only happened to me with birds, actually. It hasn't happened to me with the bigger stuff like the elk and the deer. I haven't had any problem there. All right, so next biggest negative, and this, again, I can't bash this too much because to me this is physics, and it is the minimum focus distance. So the minimum focus distance for this is 19.6 feet, I believe, maybe 19.7, just shy of 20 feet basically. So my example earlier when I was giving you the ISO readings of if there were a bird in this tree, well, if there was a bird in this tree, I wouldn't be able to shoot it because it's closer than 20 feet. I'd have to put it down and grab this thing. So that brings up an interesting thing that I didn't really think about, and that, again, nobody has really talked about. I think Tony and Chelsea mentioned it actually in their video. They mentioned the minimum focus distance, but the thing that I've realized is that I've had to make new habits when I'm shooting with this lens. So when I'm shooting with other lenses like this, the Tamron's minimum focus distance is under 2 meters. So it's very similar to my 100-400, which is also very close to 1 meter. And that's amazing, right? That you can get a lot closer. Everybody knows in wildlife, though, it's not always easy to get close. And like, I had this sparrow that I was shooting, these Lincoln sparrows, on the shore of this lake here, and they started hopping a little closer to me. And I had my camo on, I had the blankie on, the ghillie suit over my head and everything, so they couldn't see me, really, and I wasn't moving. But they started getting too close, way closer than 20 feet. So I had to switch to this very carefully, and I was able to get these shots, which are uncropped. And eventually, they got even too close for that. And one of them actually crawled into my lens hood, and I wish I could have gotten a video of that somehow, but I didn't. But the point is, I've got a lot closer to the Sparrow with the 600 than I could have with the 800. And my other point was, before I sidetracked myself, was that training myself to shoot differently and to walk differently and to look for wildlife differently, in that with the other lenses that have the closer focus distance and which are smaller, less than 800, I constantly find myself trying to get as close as possible, trying to sneak in, trying to wear the camo and, you know, find a nice place and get as close as possible, get in the blind, all that stuff, whatever. Getting as close as possible is super important with my other lenses. With this, not only is it not as important because it's longer, because it's 800, it's twice my 400, but I actually can't get closer, and so that's a detriment. And if I were to try to get too close to something and then I find out that I am too close, then I have to back up. And backing up is just more movement, and that's more chance to spook whatever it is that I'm trying to photograph, and then that's just a huge detriment. So that could possibly make me miss the shot. So I have to get into that mindset of really being able to gauge what is 20 feet, you know, and I think that's a habit that you're going to want to get into if you get something like this, or if you move up in the world and you get the big, any of the big whites, 500 f4, 600 f4, 800 5.6, those big expensive white lenses. They're similar, you know, minimum focus distance 12, 14, 16, 19 feet, you know, all of that. So either way, that's just a habit that I have found myself having to get into in how I approach my wildlife. So not having to get as close and not being able to get as close, period. And on the upside of that, though, sometimes not getting close is good, like with rutting elk like this. I would not want to be too close to those antlers. And sometimes it's nice because you don't have to hike as far, or you don't have to put in as much effort in that way. You always need to put in effort for wildlife, usually. But sometimes it's just nice to know that you don't have to try to get as close and you can still pull off a shot. All right, this is getting really overexposed. Maybe that's a little bit better. I don't have a neutral density. Well, I do have my neutral density filter with me. I'm sitting on it. I'm not going to put it on though. So I'm shooting at f8. So you guys still have a nice mountain background to look at. Another downside, maybe it's a downside, maybe it's just a weird quirk to get used to. The push-pull thing, you know, the whole you can't shoot unless it's locked out and extended out and locked in position. The camera will tell you, please put the lens into a shooting position. So there's that. It's weird. It's not a huge negative. However, the push-pull part, I used to have the 100 to 400, the original, where it was a push-pull to zoom, and that, coupled with the fact that there is no weather sealing on here, I think is going to invite a lot more dust, and I'm just not stoked on that. I feel like I will be cleaning this and my sensor a lot more because of that. But it's not a huge deal. I'm not going to bash it for that. It wouldn't be a deal breaker for me for buying it for sure, because I'm getting used to it. It's pretty quick to put away and make more compact, which is nice for the bag. It barely fits in the bag the way I have it set up. I have to set it a little bit diagonally, but it does fit, and it wouldn't fit if it was extended. So that's nice. One pro though, real quick, is the ring right here. Like most of the RF lenses, having this little extra control ring is really nice. I can set it to exposure compensation, which I love for wildlife. Being able to set this to exposure compensation is so great because I can put it in manual and I can have my shutter speed set to what I want. I can put it in auto ISO because I'm just not worried about what the ISO is going to do on this R5. And then I can make the control ring for my exposure compensation, which is fantastic because if I'm shooting that way where the sun is over here to my back and I'm shooting that way and the birds are in beautiful light, and then, or whatever it is, the elk or whatever, and they go behind me or I've turned around and all of a sudden my subject is backlit, being able to crank the exposure compensation up on the fly like is a game changer. It's so wonderful to have that ability. So I dig the control ring. All right, now you get trees for your background because the sun was about to come over this tree. I don't want to deal with that exposure nightmare. So I guess I'll go over, kind of talk about like my thoughts for me personally, why I'm having, or why I was having a struggle between which lens should I get, because I decided that I want more reach than my 400. I don't want to get the teleconverter for the 400. I just want a native more reach, you know, 600, 800, something like that. So my thoughts are, I've been having a really tough time between the pros and the cons of these lenses. You know, I love the things that were keeping this as a contender for me are, it's very similar to my 1-400 in size and weight. It is a little bit heavier, but not much. Another side note, I said it in the other review that I did of this, but I love the tripod collar on this. It's Arca Swiss compatible, and it's a little bit bigger for your hand. So just carrying that around, that has no bearing on the actual review or comparison to these two. I just wanted to throw that out there. But this being so similar to my 1-400 in size and weight and all of that, I know that I can handle it. I know that I can handle the weight. Even walking around carrying this thing on my R5 or my R6, and even with it zooming out, you know, I don't have a problem with that. And I do love the extra 200mm reach from my 1-400. I also really enjoy the fact that this lens is weather sealed, and I have put that to the test back east when I had it before. You know, in the rain and out here in the dust and all of that, it is weather sealed. Oh, that was a robin. I thought it was a flicker. Just flew right over my head. There's a flicker over there. If I see it, I'll shoot it in the face for you guys. Not really interested in shooting a robin, but so anyways, weather sealed. I love it. That is one of the biggest contenders for me still wanting this lens. The fact that I get 200mm more than my 400, and the fact that it's weather sealed. I also love the fact that this is a zoom. So being more than just a wildlife photographer, I also do landscape, and having the ability to back out and do more environmental portraits of the animal or the wildlife that I'm shooting, or just to have the ability to back out and get a nice landscape at 150 versus 600. So having the zoom, very handy. So on the note of the zoom, let's, my scatterbrain just remembered something. Let's talk about another difference between these two and the habits that I was telling you about. So when you're photographing with a zoom lens, it's very nice, especially if you're a beginner and you haven't had much experience with longer lenses. It's very nice to be able to back out, find in the wider field of view, and then find your subject and then zoom in. So a lot of people, if they've never used a big long lens before, and even if you have, sometimes you just get lost in the lens because it's so long and the focal range becomes so narrow, especially when they're close. You can have a hard time finding your subject, and being able to back out real quick and then zoom back in real quick is very handy once you find your subject. So building that habit of learning how to look up with your eye and then point to get the 800 where you want it and the field of view, so that you're not, where is it? Oh, you know, oh, what is that? And then, you know, it can be challenging. So that's another thing. Don't dismiss your gear as being horrible. Up your skills and learn how to look and find in the viewfinder, and then look with your eyes and correlate that. But this doesn't have that much of a problem, because for one, 600 is slightly wider than 800, and for two, I have a zoom. So if I can't find it, I can back out and then zoom in, and that's very nice. Another reason why I thought I would struggle is that with my choice between these two is that for an all-in-one, right, I want something, we want the best of both worlds. It's kind of in our nature these days. We're all so spoiled, and with technology and all this, we want the best of both worlds. I want the longest glass possible. I want a zoom. I want the fastest aperture possible. I want it all, right? And we just can't have it all. Physics says no, you can't have all that in one thing. But I want as close as I can get. I want to minimize my compromises, And with something like that, that's definitely possible, in that I have my zoom. It's very sharp at 600. I'm not worried about sharpness. I have my faster aperture of 6.3, which is much better than f11. And it's only marginally heavier, comparatively speaking. It's about 1.5 pounds heavier than the 800, which depends on who you are and what you feel like doing. That's not much in the grand scheme of big white lenses or big wildlife lenses. So this has a lot going for it, and the fact that I can throw the teleconverter on, which I did rent and I did try out, and that 1.4 teleconverter that Tamron made, they made for this lens, so it works well. It will put me at 840 millimeters at f9, which is still 2/3 of a stop faster than the f11. And on paper, that all sounds really good. But then when you get out into real world use, you have to take all of these things into consideration. Is the weight of this eventually going to bother you? It eventually does bother me when compared to this. Now, if this is all I had, then I will deal with it, absolutely. But having carried around the 800 this week has just been a game changer for weight, like I've said a number of times in this video. So there's that. Knowing what I'm going to shoot, because I'm not going to get rid of my Canon 100-400 Mark II. That is my favorite lens of all time. I use it for so much more than wildlife, and I still use it for wildlife, and it's great. It's a 500, I mean, it's a 400 f5.6, so it's decently fast, especially compared to these two. I mean, it's only a third of a stop faster than this, so not really. But it's decently fast. 400 is good on the R5 and the R6, especially the R5. I can crop the heck out of that image and still get really usable images because of this beautiful 45 megapixels and because of how sharp inherently the 1-400 is. And this is very similar. At 600, I'm not finding soft issues unless we're shooting something miles away, you know, or just hundreds and hundreds of meters away. If you're manage your expectations and you're in the right zone for your wildlife and it's close enough to you to where you can get away with just like a 50% crop or something, this sharpness I do not have an issue with at all. I'm very happy with the sharpness of this lens. When you put that teleconverter on though, on paper it sounds great. I could have that all in one. If I want the more reach, I can throw that teleconverter on. I have found in my experience with the teleconverter on this lens, I'm not happy with it overall. Could I use it if I absolutely had to? Yes. And unfortunately, I had the teleconverter on when I got this Osprey clip and when I got these Osprey shots. And I would have much rather had the teleconverter off because I was a little worried that it would lose focus because it hunts a little bit more, even in good light. I was in very good light, obviously, but it still hunted. And I still, when I was focusing on this killdeer, there was so many shots where it just lost focus and it just would not focus at all. And this killdeer was fairly close and it was super chill and it didn't care that I was laying there. It didn't care that I was messing with lenses. And luckily it stayed around until the focus got its act together and got on it. But if that would have been another bird and an important shot or an action shot or whatever, I would have missed it. And that made me really leery of the teleconverter. And then I've had mixed results. I think the Osprey shots, there's a couple of things wrong with them. At first glance, I think they're amazing. They look awesome, and for social media, they'll be fine. You know, but when you zoom in, you can definitely see the degradation from the IQ of the teleconverter. You can also see a little user error. I should have had a faster shutter speed. I had it 3200th of a second, I believe, maybe 2500th of a second, somewhere in there. But I should have had it faster. I should have had it like 4000th of a second. I mean, this Osprey was cruising. And so there's a little bit of motion blur. And the R5 nailed focus. The IAF was on point. It had its face, and then when it could see its eye, it had its eye. And the focusing from the camera body's perspective was on point. It was there. But the putting that teleconverter on there hurt it a little bit in the image quality and the focusing, I think. And then, you know, another downside to this is I didn't have so much of a problem when I had my 1DX2 and my 5D Mark IV with this lens being on those bodies because it was native. There was no adapter. And again, like I'm saying, there's no adapter issues with this lens. It focuses perfectly when the teleconverter is not on. I have zero issues with that at all. But it's just that extra weight, that extra size, that extra length that it's adding on there. I'm just not stoked about it, you know. And now that I'm on full mirrorless system, I want to, eventually I will get the 100 to 500, but that's gonna be a long time out because that lens is like $2,700. That's just stupid how expensive that lens is. And that's gonna take me a while to save. Even if I were to sell my 1 to 400, I wouldn't even be, that would get like 30 to 40% of what I would need to buy the 1 to 500. So now that I'm not native for the EF, now that I'm to the RF system, like having this lens on here with the adapter is one thing. It's kind of a bummer. But then having this thing on here with the teleconverter and the adapter, that's a double bummer. And I'm just not stoked on it. And I'm just not stoked overall on, I wouldn't want to professionally rely on that teleconverter and the image quality and all of that to get me the shots, when the difference between 600 and 800 focal length wise is not something that I can't crop. You know, like I would rather just crop to get that than deal with the teleconverter and lose a stop of light and lose my trust in the autofocus. So it does autofocus, it is there, but I don't know when, if or when it's going to mess up. And all of that is kind of pushing me to this, with supplementing this with my 1 to 400. And I think for me personally, because I understand how lucky I am, I understand that I have the R5 and the R6 and that I'm one of the few people right now that do have both of those. I understand that I'm super lucky. I don't take that for granted. And I understand that I'm lucky that I also have the 1 to 400 already. So I think for me, putting the 1 to 400 on the R6 and then putting this on the R5, that's going to be my combo, you know, that's going to be my jam. And when I get in low light stuff, I'll use the 1 to 400 on the R5 and I'll crop and I'll, you know, deal with the high ISO. And when I'm in beautiful daylight like this and I'm out on the ponds and shooting birds in flight, birds of prey and waterfowl and all of that stuff, then I will use the 800. And I think for me, that's moving forward until I can afford a big white, which hopefully will be someday in the next couple of years. Until then, I'll keep renting them like I always do for big projects and stuff. But I will deal with all of the negatives of the 800mm because for me personally, the pros far outweigh the negatives. And the lightweight, this is the cheapest, lightest, and highest quality 800mm lens you're ever going to find. It's the best way to get to 800mm under thousands of dollars. So you can put teleconverters on this lens or other lenses to get to 800, but in my opinion, based on the limited week, a little over a week that I've had with them, it's not as good as this with all of its downsides. So just wrapping this up here, just to keep in mind, what I really want you to take away from this is to keep in mind what you're shooting, how you're shooting, and prioritize, because you just can't have it all. Like, we all know that. If you want the best of both worlds and you don't have a mirrorless, then you probably shouldn't be watching this video because that's for mirrorless only. Then get this. This is absolutely the best budget wildlife lens around, all around, because 600, 150, zoom, f6.3, people used to complain that this was too slow. After the introduction of the F11, I don't think, it's relativity, right? Everything is relative. So I don't have a problem with the aperture on this thing. It's great. It's weather sealed. It's sharp as crap. It's heavier, but it's still way lighter than the big whites. It's affordable. You know, it's only a couple $100 more than the RF 800. It can go on your mirrorless. It can go on your DSLRs, whatever. It's just the best all-around lens there is, you know, with the little bit of compromises. And if you only have one and you don't have a 1 to 400 like I do, then I would still possibly go with this guy. If you have something to supplement, or if you are only into wildlife and you don't live somewhere in a dark forest or like, you know, whatever, and you know that you're going to be able to get out when the sun is out and have a chance of the sun being out, and you're only into wildlife, or you just have the money and you just want to spend it, then I recommend this wholeheartedly, absolutely. You know, the downsides suck. The F11 sucks. The non-weather sealing sucks. The minimum focus distance sucks. Having said that, after shooting all week with this, I still can't tell you how much I love it. I can't express like how much I love shooting with this lens. I've been so happy with the images and the video that I've been able to get from it, and I think moving forward, I'm going to be able to personally push myself to get better images now that I'm getting this. So I will be buying this. I haven't bought it yet. I have to return this tomorrow, but I will be buying this as soon as I return it. All right, so that's enough talking for me. It is definitely second breakfast time. It's super bright outside. I'm going to go try to find that Phainopepla again. If you guys have any questions about anything that I went over or didn't go over concerning this lens in particular, the 800, or concerning comparing it to this lens, the Tamron 150-600 G2, leave those in the comments below and you know I will answer them. Hit that like button if this video helped you out. It took me a really long time and a lot of effort to make it, so I hope this helps you a little bit more narrow down, figure out which way you want to go. And like I said, if you have any questions, I'm always down to talk. Hit me up on the Instagrams at Lightbenders Visuals. I'm on there every day. You can DM me. I always check my comments. I've got new videos every week, so make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It's fall now. I've got my fall presets, links down below if you guys like Lightroom or Bridge and Camera Raw and you want some cool preset packs. I made those for you guys. Well, I made them for me and you guys ended up loving them. So those are down below. They help support the channel. I've got channel memberships going on now. I do some extra content for the chai and green tea members, as well as discounts on my workshops. Like I mentioned before, I do private workshops. I've got some big workshops coming up soon. I've got Balloon Fiesta next year. I've got White Sands. I've got Scotland, possibly Japan, wildlife. It's going to be amazing. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, check out the link below for the workshops. You can sign up for the email, for the newsletter, all of that good stuff. I really appreciate your support. If you're still here, I love you guys. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.